Lewis Hamilton passed George Russell down the Kemmel Straight on lap 1 at Les Combes, after Russell struggled with power deployment out of the previous corner. Heading into the braking zone, Russell moved to the outside to try to reclaim the racing line. Hamilton suffered a snap of oversteer as he tried to hit the apex, lost the front end of the car, and made contact with Russell's Mercedes. Russell was spun into the gravel trap and retired on the spot, ending his race before the first lap was even complete. The stewards reviewed the incident and announced a 5-second penalty against Hamilton for causing a collision. He served that penalty during his pit stop under a virtual safety car on lap 21. The stewards' written verdict is where the story gets complicated. Their document acknowledged that Russell had the right to the space he was claiming into the corner. At the same time, the same document noted that Hamilton's car snapped and lost the front end in the disputed moment, and that he attempted to correct the car's trajectory before contact was made. That mitigating language is the reason the penalty was reduced from the standard 10 seconds to just 5. The explanation used to justify a lighter penalty ended up being the same explanation people used to question whether there should have been a penalty at all. Russell's own reaction after the race surprised a lot of people. Given that he had just been eliminated on lap 1 in a title fight season, the expectation was frustration directed at Hamilton. Instead, Russell called it a racing incident, and said he was very, very disappointed, but the disappointment was aimed more at his Mercedes power deployment problems on the Kemmel Straight than at the contact itself. He made clear that if his car had been performing the way it should have been, he would not have been fighting for that piece of track with Hamilton in the first place. The DNF was still costly in championship terms. It dropped Russell to roughly 45 to 50 points behind championship leader Kimi Antonelli, who won the race. What followed was a wave of Paddock reaction that mostly landed against the penalty, and it did not split along team lines the way you would expect. Toto Wolff, principal of the team that lost a driver in the incident, said Russell tried the outside. It should have been his corner, but still described the contact as a racing incident, adding that these things can happen regardless of whether a car is running at the front, middle, or back of the field. On the other side of the garage, Ferrari boss Fred Vasseur called the penalty mega harsh, pointing out that Russell had space available on the left side of the corner and was not forced anywhere near the wall. Vasseur also noted that every lap 1 incident earlier in the season had been treated as a racing incident, making this one feel like an inconsistent departure from precedent. Veteran broadcaster Martin Brundle added his own view, clearing Russell of blame for the contact but saying he was surprised the stewards penalized Hamilton at all, given that opening lap incidents are typically held to a higher bar before a penalty is applied. This meant that within a short span of time, 3 separate, senior Paddock voices, Russell himself, Wolff, and Vasseur, had each pushed back against the stewards' decision from 3 different positions inside the sport. The inconsistency argument picked up more weight later in the same race. While serving his time penalty during a virtual safety car pit stop, Hamilton's Ferrari clipped a mechanic on release. The mechanic had stepped into the path of the front right tire while adjusting the front wing and was knocked to the ground, though he was uninjured, and Hamilton stopped the car immediately once he realized what happened. After the race, the stewards investigated and fined Ferrari €30,000, with €10,000 suspended for 12 months, but no penalty was applied to Hamilton personally. The contrast is hard to miss. On lap 1, with genuinely ambiguous fault and a car that the stewards themselves said had snapped out from under its driver, the penalty landed on Hamilton. In the pit lane, with a much clearer operational error, the consequence was directed entirely at the team, and the driver was cleared. If the criteria being applied were consistent, it is worth asking why those 2 outcomes went in such different directions on the same afternoon. Despite the penalty and the pit lane incident, Hamilton recovered to finish the race in 4th place, salvaging a reasonable points haul from a weekend that could have gone much worse for Ferrari. Russell, meanwhile, left Spa with nothing, watching the championship gap to Antonelli grow at exactly the kind of circuit where he had hoped to close it. Antonelli's win extended his championship lead to somewhere in the 45 to 50 point range, cementing another strong result in a season where he has now built a commanding cushion at the top of the standings. What is left after all of this is not really a question of whether Hamilton or Russell was more at fault in that specific moment at Les Combes. It is a question of whether the stewards are applying a consistent standard to lap 1 contact this season, or whether this penalty represents a shift in how those incidents are going to be judged going forward. When the driver who was taken out of the race calls it a racing incident, when the team principal on the losing side of the collision agrees, when the rival team principal calls the penalty harsh, and when a veteran analyst says he would not have applied it, that is not a normal spread of Paddock opinion. It is close to universal agreement pointing in one direction, with the stewards' decision sitting alone in the other. Taken together, the weekend produced 2 separate steward rulings involving Hamilton and Ferrari, and only one of them ended in a penalty against a driver. The written verdict from the stewards on the lap 1 incident laid out mitigating circumstances significant enough to cut the penalty in half, from 10 seconds to 5, yet still applied a penalty at Hamilton's expense. That same document is now being read by multiple senior figures in the paddock as evidence that the penalty itself was the wrong call, not just the length of it. Toto Wolff's description of the incident as one where these things can happen came from the team principal whose driver was eliminated, which made his defense of Hamilton particularly notable. Fred Vasseur's comparison to every other lap 1 incident this season being waved off as a racing incident placed the Spa decision outside the pattern the stewards themselves had been following. Martin Brundle's comment about the higher bar for opening lap penalties added a broadcasting and analytical perspective on top of the 2 team principals' views. The pit lane fine against Ferrari, at €30,000 with €10,000 suspended for 12 months, was directed at the team rather than at Hamilton individually, even though he was the one driving the car that struck the mechanic. That decision, made in the same race weekend and by the same stewarding panel, is now sitting next to the lap 1 penalty as a point of comparison for anyone examining how consistently the rules were applied across the afternoon. Russell's own points deficit, now standing at roughly 45 to 50 points behind Antonelli, reflects both the Spa retirement and the accumulated gap built over the course of the season. Antonelli's win at Spa did not just extend his championship lead numerically, it came at a venue where Russell had hoped to cut into that gap, and instead left with 0 points added to his tally. Hamilton's recovery to 4th place meant Ferrari salvaged a reasonable haul from a session that included both a driving penalty and a team fine within the same 44 laps.